Hey guys, it's been a little while since I published anything. Some people have asked me why I kind of stopped producing content for, I think it's almost a year now at this point. I think I just start to feel like even though I was doing different projects, the things I was talking about was starting to get a little bit repetitive. I feel like I'm repeating myself constantly, and I don't think I was offering anything new and useful to my audience anymore. But then after a very long break, I am starting to missing sharing what I'm doing with you guys. So I think from now on, I'm just gonna do this kind of super casual videos, just some breakdown of what I did. Producing a new project can take a little while, so I don't really have a consistent upload schedule. But whenever I do, and I feel like there's some smaller things that I can talk about, some things I want to share, maybe some new discovery in the new project, I would definitely make a quick video about it and hopefully still be helpful in some way. This is the most recent project I just finished, and it was mostly a design practice. I kind of want to combine a few different elements that I saw in references and see if I can put something together that become a new design. In this project, there are a ton of gold. There's actually always a ton of gold in all my projects for some reason. I can't really explain it. But I thought this would be a great opportunity to talk about how do we make one single material interesting. Since this whole mask is just one material and it consumes such big area of this entire asset, we cannot really have a very kind of boring gold. It's gonna pretty much make half of the bust boring if this one material isn't interesting enough. So I thought that would be a good subject to talk about with this project. First, I want to talk about what are the main ways that you can make a material interesting. We can go from the basics. So with PBR material, we pretty much use the same maps to manipulate all material now, especially in real time. We have obviously the base color, just diffuse by itself. We have metallic, just to tell where is going to be more metal, where is less metal. We have roughness. Roughness is going to be an extremely important map whenever you're dealing with very reflective material. And we have normal map that creates the high information. I don't see anything here right now, but if I go to normal, height, and mesh, that's where we're going to see all the high res baking onto this object. So those are the basic elements that put a material together. So I want you to think that every one of these elements is an opportunity to make interesting things. Normally, I build everything from my diffuse map and extend it to other things. So mostly I think from a color point of view, what is the basic color? What kind of different elements is on this material that I can add in different colors? And every time I add a new element, I want to think how that new element will also affect roughness, sometimes maybe even height, normal map. We can quickly go through the layers for this material. So I was using some kind of antique gold references, and it's quite common that in between cavities, it started to trap dirt. It's a little bit more weathered. And a lot of times close to the edge area is starting to get a little bit shinier and the color gets a little bit brighter. It's very likely that those are the area that's more on the outside of the object, and those are the area that gets friction with other objects whenever it's in any kind of environment. That's why normally they get a little bit more smoothed out and the color can get a little brighter. By default, I would make any kind of metal edge just slightly brighter, even if I don't see it very clearly in my references. I find that in general works pretty well. With reflection and everything, even though on diffuse, this like white is so obvious, but when you really turn on the entire material, it's not really that obvious. I try to make it stand out a little bit better by making the roughness quality a little bit different too on the edge. And I think that's actually mostly what you are seeing, not so much the color itself. We can do a quick walkthrough of all the layers. It's actually really simple. The bottom layer is just a very simple gold. It's a very basic gold texture I have here. As you can see in the diffuser, there's barely any details here. The only thing that I'm really trying to get is just to get the metal maybe quality correct, but nothing else. Like I mentioned before, anything that's very reflective, we see a lot of detail through the roughness change. Right now we have a very consistent roughness throughout. So I thought first thing I want to work on is just adding some roughness quality first before I get into colors and everything. So I built a folder just for roughness, which means all these shaders in here currently, everything is turned off except for roughness. One of the reasons why I like to do that is just to focus only on one element, a very important element, without getting distracted by other things, because I know how important this thing is if I want this whole material to look good. I kind of laser focused on it to adding more variation and interesting feel before I want to worry about color. Especially with reflective material, when the whole material is turned on, sometimes it's hard to tell what we see. Is it mostly reflection or is it mostly diffuse color? For this asset, I chose to focus on roughness quite a bit first and then build up everything on top, because I know it's such a big area of the asset and it's going to be really important. So the first roughness map I have is a scratch map. It's kind of just a very basic generic cloud kind of map. I think I got this from a very weathered metal texture. That's actually a color texture, but I brought it into Photoshop, make it black and white, and I crank up the contrast quite a bit to kind of get that general blotchy breakup that I wanted for this metal. The next part, throughout this whole area, it's still consistent in a way. We start to get this patchy breakup. I wanted to kind of separate the shape of the asset with roughness a little bit as well. So I added just a little bit, kind of like the flatter area of the object. I don't know if you can see some of the flatter area without ornaments. I added a separate kind of roughness, just make it a little bit less reflective. I find it's actually kind of useful on a metal object. This is just how I did things through experience. I don't really have a very strong logic to it, but I find that whenever you have a very flat surface where there's not tons of detail on a metal, I will prefer to kind of reduce the roughness just a little bit, because I know that at the end I'm going to add quite strong edge at the end and it will be a nice contrast. It's pretty much just a habit. You're welcome to try it out. So the last thing I add in this roughness folder, it actually wasn't too obvious when I turn it on. Let's see. The last thing was the edge. So that's what the roughness looks like at this point. Have some blotchy breakup throughout, have some less roughed area for the more boring flat surfaces, and also a very strong dark roughness for the edge. So this is actually not the final roughness for the object. I just wanted to do this first on my very basic, boring, diffuse, basic material first as a base together, and then I'm going to start to build everything on top. One thing I always like to do in my texturing, this is also like a habit thing, but I find it very useful, is to have a generic color breakup. That would be something that's not super obvious. We are not adding a pattern to this metal. We're just having some kind of color variation that's very kind of soft in the material that you can you can feel it, but you might not necessarily see it super clearly. That's kind of the feel I'm going for. You can feel the variation, but you might not be able to clearly pinpoint what is the variation really. Because this is not about reference. This is just about adding kind of some color, some variety into just a very basic thing. This is what the color breakup looks like. Like I mentioned before, we can feel a little bit color differences throughout maybe, but it's not super clear. If I go to diffuse color, we can kind of see what the diffuse looks like, but because it's a very reflective material, that the reflection takes away of a lot of what we see, we're not going to actually see all those patterns that we just saw in the diffuse color. It's just going to be a feeling of it's not just one thing. The next thing I added is a red color breakup. those kind of inspiration of things I add from here on are from references. I was observing some antique gold. Certain areas of the gold start to get a little bit of a reddish after a little while. So I thought that would be an interesting color to add. The decision to choose this kind of different color to add sometimes is also an artistic decision. We have this gold in general is orange-ish, slightly to the red side, and it's general very warm toned. I kind of add a little bit of red into it. It will make the color even warmer, but only in spots, not in the general area. Otherwise, this metal is gonna look too red and it wouldn't make any sense anymore. The next thing I add is a blue-green color. Some of these metals, after they've been around for a while, so I'm not doing a metal with patina because gold does not weather that way. The reason why I add a blue-green color, which you would not expect from a gold material, it's in general a more artistic decision. Because this whole thing is super warm at this point, it's warm color everywhere. I even added spots of red. We wanted to add a little bit of a cold tone into it to have a little bit of a color contrast. Color in general looks a little bit more interesting when there's some elements of complementary color in it. When I observed nature, there's so many kind of natural complementary color nature just put together, and that's why I feel like a lot of times nature looks beautiful. Even with something like this, that's a very single material. It's very one color dominate. I still want to put just a little bit of a complementary color in it, even if sometimes logically it does not make too much sense from a reference point of view. But I feel like in general, it just makes things look more interesting. I can turn this layer on and off a little bit, and I think you'll be able to see a difference. So the next thing I add is the bright edge. We already have a very shiny edge from the roughness folder. Now it's to add some color to it. So the whole thing light up quite a bit. It's because there's so many edges, especially in this area. I can show you what the mask looks like. It covers quite a bit of area, and I didn't really bother to break it up more because my sculpting was kind of irregular, so the curvature map itself, the bake is a little bit irregular. I just got lazy and I didn't bother to break it up, but obviously for some maybe hyper-real subjects, we will want to break this up a little bit better, but I just left it there. And the last thing we have is just general grunge. Like I mentioned before, when gold weather, it kind of turned to capture this dark kind of grunge in cavity areas and the AO areas. And that's what this one is for, just to follow the reference and make it look a little bit weathered old gold. And also it provides another layer of roughness breakup. That is pretty much all the layers I have on here. As you can see, it's actually quite simple. It's more like 6 different things. I hope you find this breakdown useful. This is definitely different from some of the old video I made where I actually recorded all my work and gave you a more like step-by-step process. I hope this is still useful, and I will find something else to talk about next time.